Welcome back to Monday Mod Tips. Today, by popular vote, we will be doing a complete disassembly and reassembly of the Nerf rival Takedown. We will, of course, first take a look at the controls. Like all rival blasters, it does have a safety, which is simply a trigger lock safety. This one is not ambidextrous, so it looks like it was gonna be, and then they just changed their mind, which is rude. It does not have any kind of a jam door. When you start operating the slide, as soon as you get past that first little section, it clicks and locks. The trigger is locked at this point, so you cannot fire it while it's priming. And then there is a second lock. It locks right there. So it's one of those ratcheting locks like we've seen in a lot of the rival blasters so far. And then once we go all the way back, it locks, it clicks, it pops into place, and the jam door is now open. You can load it. And then on the way forward, it locks there, so it can't go back anymore. It can only go forward. Same thing there, and then when it gets all the way forward now, it locks the slide completely, but the trigger is now unlocked and we can fire the blaster. There is a jam release here, which unlocks that slide for you, and will allow you to prime it should something get jammed. You will need to pull it all the way back and re-unlock that lock. You can kind of hear it come loose. You get to there and the slide will lock. You pull it all the way back and you can hear something spring loose, and then it will go forward again for you. If you hold the trigger down as you prime the blaster, it doesn't lock at any point, but it will continue to feed rounds into the barrel, so if you've already loaded one, you then load two, and two it might be able to handle. Much past that, it's just going to end up jamming and causing problems, but that is an interesting feature that I wasn't aware of, and I'm kind of curious how that works and whether it's actually supposed to work or if something's gone wrong with mine. So let's get this open and take a look. I recall there are a pair of smaller screws on either side of the priming handle, and this was something that concerned people. They were afraid that those weren't going to be solid enough to handle heavy spring loads, but it has not proved to be the case. The blaster is fairly stout. Alright, let's see if we have any other unusual screw sizes in this thing. That appears to be the same. Usually this one up front would be one of the longer ones. Alright, we've got some here in the rail, which are likely to be a little bit shorter. I'm wondering if they are the same as these. No. So that is a third size so far. There's a long one. This middle one is apparently a long one. Alright, I think we've got all the screws. Had little ones in the rail, a long one right here, and then the two small ones on the slide, and I think that's it. We should now be able to get it open. Sure enough. Okay. There is, other than a little rubber bumper, nothing else on the far side of the shell. It is clipped in place. Looks like it'd be fairly easy to get off and paint, which is cool. And we'll take a look at the inside. This one actually is stock. Interesting. Okay, we can take out our trigger, which does have a nicely captive spring. I like it when they do that. Looks like our safety is riveted in place? Oh, that is just rude. So we can't take the safety off. Well, then this whole assembly kind of pops out together. We have this weird looking plastic leaf spring. Here is our slide ratchet, that locks it going one direction and the other direction. And we have it on the far side, which is going to make it hard to show. If you look at some of my other rival videos, it might show up better there. We have our catch assembly back here. Let's go ahead and get it out of there. So, unlike the Kronos, which has it a little bit... Well, no, this is still very captive. Oh, that's the... that's our slide release. Okay. So that's what that is, which is not entirely necessary, but it is handy. And then we have our captive catch mechanism. It looks like it's actually clipped together, but I'm gonna... I really don't want to take it apart, but I probably should just for completeness. So it is just clipped in. They are not bad clips. They will come out, and then we can get our catch, which this is a very solid and robust catch mechanism. All of the rival blasters have been that way, and I appreciate that. Like I said, our safety appears to be riveted in place, but you can see how it works easily enough. It just pops that lever down and keeps the trigger from moving. And then now the trigger is released. Very simple. Kind of an odd way of doing that, honestly, especially using a rivet instead of like a washer-headed screw. That is unusual. We can get rid of that now. Now we have the internals. We have our muzzle, which just will come off. We have the barrel, which will simply slide out. We have our spring and our plunger rod and plunger head. That is all very easily comes out and is easily upgraded. That is one of the nice things about Rival. We can take the chamber off the, or no, this is the plunger tube. That is the plunger tube, interesting. We do appear to have a pair of washer head screws holding that in place, which appears to be, well, I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what that's about. I think it basically acts as kind of a bolt sled to a degree. It's got locking clips. I'll be interested to see. That looks like that notch is probably part of a lock. I am interested to see how exactly the internals interact with that bar, but it does come off and may not be entirely necessary. We will see. Okay, then we have the barrel. That is our air restrictor of sorts. Though it really doesn't truly restrict the air entirely. That's kind of weird. Doesn't seem to actually seal much, but if we really wanted to take it out, there is a screw right there, and then it's spring-loaded. That would all be fairly simple to remove. The follower spring, that's all clipped together. Yeah, maybe. Can I get these off without breaking anything? There we go. Non-captive springs, so be careful of springage. Okay. Oh, and why not? Let's go ahead and take the air restrictor thing out. Oh, it's not gonna wanna. Okay. Oh, another non-captive spring, so be careful of that. And then all of this is solvent welded together, so you could probably get, it looks like you could get the magazine part undone. I would be leery of those clips, though. But if for some reason you wanted to be able to take the follower out, it looks like you could get it open, but I'd be worried about breaking something, so I'm going to leave it in. Okay, so that is fully stripped down. Now we can start reassembling. We will start with the chamber magazine assembly, and we're going to put that AR back in, so we're going to need this part, which goes here in the back, and there is a notch on it, which is important because it will line up with the other part. It simply goes in the back here, and then on the other side we have this part, and it's spring, and you'll notice there is a little tab on it that is going to line up with the notch on the other part, and this is going to be tricky getting it all in there, but did I actually get it lined up on the first try? Well, I did. Okay. And you're going to have to hold those together and put the screw in, and it's the same screw as from the rail. It is a smaller screw, but it appears to be the same, but I would still try to keep track of it in case it's slightly different, and I just wasn't able to spot how the difference was. Here we go. We'll line up our thread. Alright. So that's spring-loaded to go forward, and we are good to go. Alright, next we're going to put in the magazine lips on the top, as well as the bits that hold them in place, and they are direction specific. So the good news is there's no way to put them in the wrong way. So there are a pair of tabs on the top here, and one is larger than the other, and there are the notches in here, one is larger than the other, so there's only one way it will fit in. The spring should be towards the front as far as that goes. And then we have these parts, which are the tabs that hold them down, and they're also direction specific, but they're a little bit subtler to tell which one is which. There is a rounded surface here that needs to be pointing up, and the tab needs to be pointing back. If you look on the inside, it also has the same notches, a large one and a small one, and so that obviously needs to line up. So the curved edge should be upwards, and then it's just going to clip on, and that'll hold that in place. Same thing for the other side, but with the parts that go the other direction. Put it on there, and then on there with the clip towards the back. So as long as you can push them in, everything should be well and good. Alright, next thing we're going to put on is going to be our plunger tube. This funky looking thing. And I need to remember how it goes. I believe, yep. So there's a couple of locking tabs right there that simply lock into those white tabs on either side. And that's how everything kind of moves about and situates. Lovely. Next we're going to reassemble our catch assembly, starting with this part. The tube part of the catch thing. Then we have our catch, this part. And it's going to lock into the back here so that the tab sticks towards the back. Like that. Now, it's not going to want to stay together very well, so we're going to need to put this part on in a hurry. Which is, of course, the lock and all of that. There is only one way that it will go, so that's fairly straightforward. Get the tabs in place. They all lock in. There we go. And then finally we have this part, which locks onto the back. Like so. So that when this is facing to the left, this tab should be up, because that is going to be our release right there when we reassemble. It's nice that they actually had little clips that hold it on. That I appreciate that quite a bit, actually. The spring is also well and thoroughly captive. So we now have that assembled. Now, here's where things get a little dicey and you're going to want to be a little bit careful. The easiest way to get all of this into the blaster is, in fact, to prime the blaster. You can see the catch mechanism is down right there. And so the notch on there needs to be up relative to that catch so that when you push this down, it catches. And this is the easy way to get all of this in, but we are going to want to be careful about that springing. So that is going to be in that position. We are now going to take our magazine assembly and we're going to put this into the back of it. And finally we're going to install this part, which is that strange kind of bolt sled thing, except it isn't actually where the priming handle attaches. The priming handle actually screws in down here. But this has some other parts that move and ratchet and lock on things, and so it needs to go on there. This is going to get attached with our the only two washer-headed screws in this assembly. One on either side. Careful trying not to bump that catch mechanism. Next, we're going to install our barrel, which simply goes into the front there. It is kind of free-floating. It stands still while this primes back. We'll see how that all works when we get it into the blaster. And then finally, our muzzle can go onto that, and that is that whole assembly. Now we do have a few things, at least one thing that needs to install onto the far side of the shell first. So we'll take a look at the shell, bring it in. There isn't anything that screws to it yet, which is nice, but we do have our ratchet for the slide lock. Now this is not by any means a necessary part. This is a part you could quite definitely leave out if you don't want the slide to lock. There are reasons the slide locks, but this is a tricky one. There is a torsion spring on there, and it's got two tabs that should be on either side of this notch that is sitting up. The two prongs should be on either side of that, and then when this slides down around the center post, which is that long screw post, the two tabs should be on either side of this tab right above this screw post. And that is what causes this to always return to center. So when it's ratcheting back and locking, it's getting pushed this way and clicks into the notches. And then when you go the other way, it ratchets in and locks. And that's why as the slide comes back, it can't go forward again. And then once it's gone all the way back, it can go forward but not back again. It's all the result of this little ratcheting thing on its weird torsion spring. Alright, we're going to zoom out a little bit and start installing the rest. Right, now this whole assembly can simply be placed right in there. You will need to pull the plunger tube back and get it all properly situated and aligned. There we go. It's got a groove that everything can go in and that things can slide down on and whatever else. Train! Alright, now that we have this assembly in, we can take a look at how one of the locks work. There are a number of additional locks, and the problem is they are held in place by the other half of the shell, and not having them in makes it kind of hard to show you all this. But if we pull down on this tab and release our slide can now move back, and we can see that this tab starts to rotate, and then it locks. Now the slide cannot go forward, it can only go backward because of that little lock. As we continue to go back, we have another pair of little ridges that it's going to click on, and now it's locked there. And then once you get past the final one and you prime it all the way back, and it locks, then that little tab flips up. And now it goes the other way, and it gets tilted that way until it locks. So we can go forward, but not back. Same there, and then finally, once we go all the way forward, it pops up again. And now we're back in the position where it can slide back. So that's how that little ratchet works. And that is your slide lock. And you may or may not want it, it's entirely up to you, but that is how it's there and what it's for. Okay, next we have the lock that holds the slide forward when the blaster is primed. So this is no longer locking the slide, this isn't locking anything, it's free. This little tab, which is also the release tab, you can see it is in fact locked into this notch on that bolt sled thing that I was wondering what it was there for. Well, it exists to engage and disengage locks. So it is locking the slide. So we cannot push it back because it's locked on that. And that's because the blaster is currently primed. And when the blaster is primed, the priming bar coming out of the back forces this tab up and locks it in place. And this is going to be vicious, but we're gonna fire the blaster. Oh! Now the spring is all under spring tension and it's nasty, but you can see that this has now this has now moved down because it is spring-loaded, and now it's no longer locking that bar. And we could, in fact, prime the blaster if we wanted to. The last lock is the trigger lock, and it's this piece. And it goes right here so that it locks into those notches on that bar, because this bar, once again, is being used to enable or disable locks. So the trigger goes in right there, and this notch on the front, if this is not all the way up like it currently is into those notches, then it locks the trigger. We can pull the trigger now because that is forward, or is up. If this, whoops, it doesn't like that much. Again, this is one that is properly held in place by the shell, and so it's really hard to demonstrate it when it's not, when the shell isn't on. But as soon as the bar starts going back, it forces this down, which then locks our trigger. Now, if you have the trigger pulled, you shouldn't be able to prime the blaster. It should, in fact, lock this notch and prevent you from it. But because of its angled surfaces and this plastic not being as strong as it probably should be, you can force it back past that. You shouldn't try. So don't try priming the blaster with the trigger pulled. This blaster does not have slam fire, and you would probably eventually end up doing damage to that, and you wouldn't want to do that. So that is why that worked. But that will, of course, then force the catch mechanism up, and the blaster wouldn't ever catch. It also would prevent this from ever engaging because the thing isn't catching and all of that. So that is how all of the locks in here work. I have now sprung to this thing, and I'm glad I spotted it before I fully reassembled the blaster. Are we back together? We are back in. Okay. So yeah, if you've been tinkering around on the inside and whatnot, you may want to double check and make sure that that is still in place correctly. I have the blaster primed, and the reason is because the spring is so much longer than it needs to be that it makes everything very warped and hard to reassemble. Everything gets misaligned by the spring tension if you don't prime it before you go to reassemble. So that's all the internals. Now we should be able to quite easily place our shell on top. Sure enough, no issues. Everything went on nicely. The seam closes up. Nothing being forced open, nothing jammed. And now we can start putting in screws. We will start with our odd-sized screws. We've got that one really long one right in the middle of the blaster. And as always, remember to rotate counterclockwise until you hear it click into place. That is the thread aligning, and that way you're not chewing up the thread in your screw post, which will eventually prevent the screw from having any material at all to hold on to. There we go. Now we have our 3 small screws that are up here in the rail. And then all of the rest of the shell screws, except for the 2 on the slide, which we will get to, are all the same, so it doesn't matter which ones go where. Right, now we put our slide on, and it does need to line up. There is a screw post here and a notch there, which line up with things on there. There we go. Both sides. Lovely. Long screws, or the standard screw there in the bottom. Alright, that is done. We can now check all of our controls. Remember, we assembled it primed, so if we pull the trigger now, it is going to fire. If we put the safety on, it is in fact locked. We pull it back, and now we can fire it. Sure enough, it was still primed. Slide locks immediately after a slight bit of prime, locks again there, and then goes all the way and unlocks. Locks going forward, locks going forward, finally locks there. If we prime it forward and it locks, we can release the lock using our lever here, sure enough. And then we have to go all the way back to get it to release. And there we go. That is the full disassembly and reassembly of the Nerf Takedown. I hope I've gotten the name every time I've talked about it. Probably not, and people will let me know. Survey for what blasters I will cover next will, of course, be in the description. I believe next one on the list is a Vortex Blaster. I think I will tackle a Vortex Blaster. And then I want to do the Hades and the Artemis, but I don't currently have a stock one of either to do it in. So I may have to either buy some or borrow from someone who has a stock one, because both of mine have been modified, and I would like to use a stock one so that there isn't any confusion. But hopefully this was helpful to somebody. Thank you guys for watching.